Yes. Well, thank you for inviting me here. It's such a privilege to be able to come, and it does feel a little bit like coming home. There's a few familiar faces around. I grew up going to Rebecca Street Gospel Hall around the corner. My children used to come to the brigades here. I brought my youngest one to toddler group to see and know here. So it does feel quite familiar, but it's lovely to see you all. So I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about what I do in Romania, how I came to be there, and then I just want to give you some things to think about and some prayer points as well. So if you could have first slide. Fundația Corabia, or Corabia Foundation, is the name of the organisation, the very small foundation that I work with and for. Corabia means ark, as in like Noah's Ark. So we feel it's like a place of safety for the children, for the young people that come along from all sorts of different situations, some of them quite poor, some of them in difficult situations, and a lot in just everyday sort of normal families and okay situations. We have a whole group of people that come along. Next slide, and which will, I think, is that? Yes, right. So, we are based in a village called Șadu. It's a very small rural place. As you can see, the picture next to it, that's the village that I live in. It's beautiful. I praise God that He sent me to such a lovely place to be a missionary. I get up and look out my window, and it's amazing. It's in the nearest city is Cluj-Napoca, which is about I was going to say 21 kilometres. I'm back in the UK, about 15 miles into the main city, and we're in the northwest of Romania. Next one. And I live in the house at the top that's called Casa Speranței. That means House of Hope, which speaks for itself, really. It hasn't always looked like that. It looked a little bit different, and then about 4 years ago, I had a fire. The house caught fire while I was asleep in bed, but praise God, I got out and was safe. Lost everything that I had in the fire, but it's amazing what God has done in enabling us to rebuild and make the house and the facilities so much more useful for what we want to use them for. The building underneath that is our centre, which is just next to the house. We run lots of activities for the children and the young people in Șadu, in the centre there. And to the right is another building that we've built. It was intended to be a community centre in the Roma for the Roma community, but they wanted to use it for a church, and their idea is that if it's a church, you can't do youth clubs and sewing sessions with the ladies and all sorts of other things. It has to be a church. They do allow me to run a kids club there once a week and do some kids activities with them, but they see it very much as their church, and that's my church. That's where I go on a Sunday morning along to a Roma service. It's quite interesting. It's quite different from the Romanian, and very much different to what you'd expect, what you'd be used to here. But it's lovely. It's still part of God's church, still part of the body, even though we worship in a slightly different way and a slightly different volume. Next one, I think. So, how did we come to be in this lovely place called Șadu, in this lovely village? You see the picture, there's a little boy opening a shoebox, and it all started with a shoebox. My children used to go to school up in Clayton, and at their school. They did the shoebox appeal, and the children put together shoeboxes. My son Josh, probably the girls did this too, but I'm not sure, I don't know. My son Josh put some photos in of him and his family, us, and wrote a little letter saying, my name's Josh, I'm 9 years old, and I've got 2 sisters, and I like football and things like that. And he'd put his address on. And then about 18 months later, Josh got a letter from Romania. And we thought, I mean, by this time he's only about 11 or so. I'm thinking, why not? Well, who in Romania would write to my 11-year-old son? And you're always a bit suspicious, aren't you, these things? And, well, we opened it and found out it's from the little boy who was called Radu, who'd got the shoebox. And he said, I just started learning English at school, and my English teacher has helped to translate the letter and helped me to write this one to you. And so he sent the letter, and he said, in his letter, he said, I'm from a Christian family, which is not that unusual in Romania. 85% of the country would identify as Christian, as Eastern Orthodox Christian. But then he said, I am part of a Pentecostal church that meets in my house. And so we got a little bit excited at that, because we were part of the Pentecostal church at Bradford Ealing. So that was exciting. And it was at a time when I used to come to the toddler group here. So you've got a connection with this, though you might not realise it. There was a lady who used to come, and her family used to come to Sunbridge, called Michaela. You remember Michaela? Yeah. And she said, well, I told her about it because I thought she'd be interested. She's Romanian. She said, I can help you. I can write letters for you or translate letters. And so she helped with that. And we got to know this family, and they invited us over. And then we took a group on mission 20 years ago this Easter. We did our first mission in Shardu. We did a day with the children as well as other things, and it was amazing. We went on this field in the village. We had a parachute, but not these nice bright colourful ones that are made for parachute games. It was a proper parachute. It was huge. And we started off playing some parachute games. We had lots of other games planned, but all the kids wanted to do was play parachute games. And the next day, I couldn't lift my arms up. I spent all day doing this with the parachute. And we gave them salami sandwiches and a piece of cucumber. And they were so excited they were having a picnic. And I think back to that now, even the kids that we have now, they'd look at me and say, what are you giving me? Even the Romanian ones. But then it was just amazing that we were doing this. So that's how we started, how I came to be in Romania. So I'll tell you a little bit, I think, if we look at the next slide. Some of the things that we do. Our mission has always focused on children's work. We do regular weekly kids clubs with the Roma children and with the Romanian children. When we can, and we've got enough staff around, or visitors, teams that come, we do activities in the holidays. We'll do week-long holiday clubs or sports clubs, all sorts of things. Whatever skills we have, whoever comes, whatever their skills are, that's what we're doing with the children. We did have, until the pandemic, we had a regular youth work. We had a Bible study and a social night, and I'm just in talks with somebody to help so that we can start these up again. We were getting about 80 along to a Bible study every week, and also probably about 30-40 along to a social night, which was mainly FIFA and table tennis and pool and things like that, but we always have a God spot in it where we talk to them about issues of the day and what the Bible says, what we think Jesus is saying about whatever might be happening at that time. We're involved in the Roma Church, I've mentioned that. Lots of the people in the community in São Paulo, there's quite a large community there, and they this community used to have a reputation for being quite lawless, alcoholic, violent. And when we rebuilt our house after the fire, we had an open day and invited lots of people, and the local mayor came. And he said to everybody that was there the difference that there was in the community since we'd arrived, and how God had, he didn't put it in those terms, he said what you've done to us, but we know it's God that's working in people's lives, changing people's lives. He said the crime rate's gone down, the school attendance has gone up, more people are in paid employment instead of the employment that they employ themselves with, which often means breaking into your outbuildings and things like that. So, even, you know, the people in the locality recognise what God is doing, even if they might not put it in those words. We know it's definitely that God is working. And quite a few of these have made commitments to Christ. We've got quite a lot of people who've been baptised. Some are going on really strongly, some are backslidden, and we keep praying for them. But there is probably regularly 40, 45 people from the Roma community attending church every Sunday morning in São Paulo. Something that hasn't been able to happen over the last 2 years, has been the mission teams. Over the years, lots of people have got to hear about us, different churches in the UK, in America, in Holland, in Denmark, a few different countries. Have heard what we're doing, they've contacts one way or another, and they've come out to be part of that work. And we have all ages. I love it when we get a youth group out, and they've got all that energy, and it means they can run around and play football with the kids, and I don't have to quite so much. And quite often when we get young people, as well as the young people being on mission and taking some of the holiday clubs and doing the lessons with the kids, the Bible studies, there's also time for training the young people that have come to us in leadership, in mission, and helping to shape them and their walk with Christ. It's just an amazing opportunity. But it's not just young people that come, there's all age ranges. In fact, probably one of the oldest that came was in their 80s, and he was a man who used to work for Gideon's, which is called something else, is it Good News for All or something? And he came, and he was amazing with the kids, and he was giving his New Testaments out, and they all wanted them, and they kept going and joining the back of the queue, but he wasn't stupid, he realised what they were doing. He was lovely, and his ministry was amazing. I really appreciated that, and it really blesses me when people come and they may be ministering to our young people, to the Roma church, but I receive such a blessing through their ministry too. And with the rebuilding of the house, we've wanted to use it as a training place. I mentioned with teens coming out sometimes, part of that experience is receiving training, but also some teams come and I'm not doing anything, or I may just be facilitating it in that I feed people, a whole team of people, while their own leaders do some training with whichever group they've brought. We've had an international group. I don't know if anybody have heard of Ambassadors for Christ. They've been a couple of times, and they've done leadership training with church leaders that were from Ukraine, Slovakia, Macedonia, Romania, and various places around. And it was just amazing to see that. I think if you've gone to the next slide, there might be some pictures of some of these things. Yeah, the bottom left one, as you look at it, that's the team with some of the Ambassadors for Christ, and they were just amazing. And the youngsters came round just one evening, and because they knew that there was a group there, and we were just singing out in the grass. It was a nice sunny evening. As you can see, some of our baptisms and the top pictures, one is the kids club, doing the story of Noah and the Ark there, and a Bible study as well. So we do all sorts of things, although it all came to a halt with the pandemic. We weren't allowed to meet together. We couldn't, just as things were restricted here, it was even more so in Romania. And I felt a little bit, what am I doing here? I feel a bit of a loose end. I feel like I'm being a bit useless. But time and again, through things that I heard and read online or in my own study, I was reminded, Liz, this is God's work. God doesn't stop working, and he's quite good at working without you, and he chooses sometimes to work through you and use you, but doesn't necessarily need me. And it's been quite a lesson that I've been learning over the last 2 years, and it's good to see that God still works. As we started up the children's groups after the pandemic, we had larger numbers than we had done before we stopped doing them. We have, sometimes we have about 50 children in the Roma group and on a Tuesday night, which makes for a very lively evening. We also have, we were getting about 20 children on a Wednesday night with the Romanian children, and now we're getting 30 to 35 who are regularly coming and really keen to come along, and they keep bringing friends, and that's growing and is really good. So it's just been such a blessing to see that even though I wasn't out there talking to the children, bringing the children in, doing programs, God's still been working in their lives. Excuse me, I've got a bit there. That would be great, yeah. Next slide. What's on there? Oh yeah, this is just a few of the other things that we do, as well as, I was telling the children this morning, when I was 9, I told my mum I wanted to be a missionary. And I thought a missionary stood up like this and preached at people. And I've realised that, well, that is part of what you do. You've got to use your words. As I was listening to Mark Greenwood last week, and he was saying our mission has words. We're saying our mission has words. How do we tell people? But part of when we're telling people, we have to show them as well. So the top left picture was food that we provided for people in the Roma community. During the pandemic, we did a few food drops because they weren't able to work, they weren't able to travel, and they couldn't work, and it was really difficult for them. So we were able, as a foundation, to, thank you, provide some food for them and some other help. We do that on a small scale as an ongoing thing for some families, food, clothes, medicines, but not for everybody, but this was a more wide-scale thing. The other picture with the food was at Christmas. I managed to put, I think, about 30 food parcels together this Christmas just gone to go around to bless certain families that I knew needed some extra help, both in the village, the Romanians in the village and the Roma in the Roma community. The bottom picture is the arrival at about 6 o'clock in the morning of our shoe boxes. Normally we've had somebody bring them over in a van, but Brexit messed that up for us, and we had to have it shipped over on an articulated lorry. Came into our little village. That was interesting. And then we had to collect them from the main road, the main road, it's not that main, the little road, the tarmacked part in the village, and taking them up in our minibus up to our centre. So these are some of my helpers, Bogdi and Gabby, who are part of our foundation, and I labelled them up with the local education authority gives me a list of every child's name, just because I asked for it. No data protection or anything. Here you go, there they are. So I write out a label for every child, put it on the shoebox, and then we go, well, no, usually we go into the school, deliver them. this time we had to put them on the school bus and let the school bus driver take them. We weren't allowed to go into the schools to deliver them. So that's another aspect of what we do. Next slide. This is something very up to date. This was just a few weeks ago. This is a Ukrainian family. I drove up to the Ukrainian border. It's about a 4-hour drive through the mountains, very windy, and picked up this family. We'd been asked if we could pick them up from the Ukraine and take them home, give them a safe place for a while before they travelled on to they'd been offered a home in Norway. And it was just such a privilege to be able to help them. The stories that they had to tell were heartbreaking, but it's so good to know that they're safe in Norway now. Apart from the man here, that's the dad of the family. He's still in Ukraine, obviously. He had to stay behind. And the girl there with the 2 children, her husband and her brother are still in Ukraine. Obviously, they're not allowed to leave the country. But our minibus has taken aid into Ukraine on a few occasions, and we are available as well for any more that may need picking up and transporting somewhere, or even to come and stay with us for a while for somewhere safe. Right, next one. Right, I just have a few thoughts that I want to share with you quite quickly. Time's going. In Exodus 4, God asked Moses a question. He said, "What do you have in your hand?" I'm not going to talk about that particular scenario. Some of you may know that he had a staff in his hand and God changed it into a snake and back again, and just to demonstrate his power and to demonstrate that he would be with Moses through what he was asking him to do, which was to go and lead the children of Israel out of captivity. I wanted to think about some other people who had something in their hand. And I know this is not the family service and the children aren't here, but I thought I'd bring some visual aids. If I can find all of them. Right, first visual aid. Does anybody know what this is? It is a bit of a rope, but it's a rope made into something. A sling, yes, and there's a stone. So, I'm not doing it as I did in the family service before, with the hand up to guess who that was. We know it was David, who had a sling in his hand, and he used that to kill Goliath. But when we read about David, he was really indignant when he heard Goliath shouting at God's chosen people, threatening them, challenging them. And he said, how dare they? How dare they do that to God's people? And he went out with his sling to slay Goliath. And Goliath laughed at him. But David said to him, I come in the name of the Lord. This was a man who'd written, if God is for us, who can be against us? What harm can man do to me? And he really believed that and knew that. So he was ready to face Goliath with a sling and a little stone out of a stream. And that was because, really, his trust was not in this sling and this stone. His trust was in God. If he'd had something else that he normally used, he'd had lots of practice in using this in his shepherd days. But still, even though he had a skill, a talent, it was God that he trusted, and it was in God's power that he used what was in his hand. And when we are asked to do something, we face lots of giants, and also not such big giants. And we're still maybe a little bit afraid, how can I do that? Do I have the right tools? But if God's asked you to do something, it doesn't matter. Trust him. He's going to use whatever you have got to hand, whatever he has entrusted to you, whether that's singing. We had some lovely singing earlier. If it's working with children, if it's standing up and speaking out for social justice, if it's travelling to other countries to talk to people, God will have given you skills to be able to do that. But still, it's not trusting in what I can do. It's trusting that God can use what I can do and having that trust there. So that was David with his sling in his hand. Right, next one. It's not quite... We've scaled down because the rest of them won't fit in my little bag. So here we have a tin of sardines. Just imagine there's 5 of these bread rolls. Yeah, so I've got 5 of them. Put them down there. Yeah, we know the story about 5,000 people. Jesus had been teaching them. And it was getting to the end of the day, and the disciples said, they're going to be hungry. Send them home, Jesus. They need to go get the dinner. And he said, no. You're going to feed them. And they were a bit nonplussed at that. There was no McDonald's or Morrison's around the corner. What are they going to do? They didn't even have enough money. If there was McDonald's or Morrison's around the corner, what are they going to do? And one of the disciples, Andrew, says, well, there's a little lad here, and he's got 5 loaves and 2 fish, but what are they? What good are they going to be among so many? I think Jesus was thinking, just wait and see. Yeah, just see. And this little boy, willing to give up his lunch, maybe he thought he was giving it to Jesus, just to Jesus. He probably wasn't completely aware of the whole situation, that there was a whole huge crowd that needed feeding. Or maybe he was and thought, well, if we all give a little bit, maybe we can share it out. I don't know, but we're told that that's all there was. But he was willing to give it to Jesus. He wasn't daunted by the size of the problem. He took his little bit and gave it. I always like this story and think of my story with the shoe boxes. Just a little shoe box. And the number of people that have been touched because of a little shoe box. All the children that have come through the programs, the young people, the people that have been on mission and visited us, that have been blessed and lives changed because of a shoe box. And this little boy must have been absolutely amazed at what Jesus did. Not just the little boy, everybody else, I think, especially his disciples. He used what he had in his hand and he gave it to Jesus. And when in the giving of that, Jesus was able to use what he'd given to be able to bless everybody there and to have lots over to spare. So it's amazing what miracles God can supply, what he can do. I've heard just recently, last week, of a miracle very similar to that. Somebody in Ukraine, I think in Mariupol, who was feeding neighbours. She didn't have very much, but every time she went to feed them this pasta, there was more pasta and more pasta, and it was amazing. It was just multiplying to be able to help and to feed her neighbours and those around her who were so in need of food. They didn't have anything. So don't be put off by the size of the problem. Don't look at that. Look at what you can give to Jesus and leave it up to him to do what he can do to solve that problem. Right, very quickly, one more. Next. Oh, out my bag. Here, these are the two smallest, the smallest Romanian coins. It's 1 ban. It's worth about 1/5 of a penny. So these are 2 tiny coins. And we know the story of the woman that put the 2 coins into the offering plate. And Jesus pointed her out to the disciples, told them, see, these people have been coming, making a big fuss, putting big wads of cash in, showing everybody what they're giving. I mean, I'm sure it was very gratefully received to be used, whatever the temple was used the money for. But I think Jesus was probably the only one that noticed this woman slipping 2 coins. And do you know what he told his disciples? It was all that she had. And I think if that's all that I had, at the very least I might be tempted just to give one and keep one. She had 2 coins and gave them both. She could have chosen and, well, okay, I'm still giving to God, I'll give half of it. But she chose to give both. And she probably didn't even know that Jesus had noticed or that anybody else had noticed. But do you know, even though we don't know her name, 2,000 years later, we know about her. We can learn from this little old lady who gave what she had. And I just want to remind us that our giving shouldn't be anything that we expect other people to notice or to applaud or because it makes us look good. I have a little issue sometimes when people give us shoe boxes or send us nicely knitted jumpers and things, and they say, oh, will you send me a picture of the child that gets it? And I'm thinking, I give out 500 shoe boxes. I don't know who's going to receive your box. I can't be there with the camera, and besides which, I need permission from their parent and things like that. But do you know, we should be willing to give without anybody noticing. We should be willing to give when we don't see any result from it. I'm sure that woman didn't think, oh, look, the temple's got a new coat of paint because I was giving, or there's food for the poor because I gave into that. Even when we don't know the result, be willing to give here very sacrificially because she gave everything. I know my time's just about done, but I want to tell a really quick story because it involves my dad and it'll make him smile. Some years ago, sometime before my mum died, so it must have been about 11 years or so ago, she was reading a book by a missionary called Amy Carmichael, who was a missionary in India, the beginning of last century. And she was reading through it. And then at the back of the book, towards the end of the book, she said, she's writing about some stories. And she said, look, there's a letter here that she's said, and it shows the letter. It's a letter from a 10-year-old boy who sent his pocket money. Him and his 2 younger brothers had sent their pocket money to India to help with this mission. And the little 10-year-old boy was my dad. And this was 70 years later that he heard about it only in a book. It was amazing that it was a blessing for him that he got to find out that was noticed by that missionary so long down the line. But you know, it was noticed by God as well. God doesn't miss anything. Right, quickly, the last one. Perfume or alabaster box of ointment. I don't have an alabaster box of ointment. This is the nearest thing I have. And Jesus was invited to a meal by a Pharisee, and there were other Pharisees there. And I think he was probably only invited there so they could grill him, ask him questions, see where they could trip him up, perhaps. It wasn't even offered the normal, customary hospitalities. And this woman came in. It says she was a sinner. Now, the Bible tells us we're all sinners, so for it to specifically comment, this woman had a reputation. She was not somebody the Pharisees would want around, and she would be very much looked down on. And yet she was willing to break through that, to go against custom, to go and to wash the feet of Jesus and to break this ointment over his feet as a demonstration of the love that she had for Jesus. And while the Pharisees were thinking, if he really was a prophet, he'd know who she was. He'd know this person, he wouldn't be letting her anywhere near him. And Jesus said, she's been forgiven much, and so she loves much. Do we use what we have to demonstrate our love for Jesus? It may be that in doing that we have to incur the scorn of others. We may be looked down at or laughed at. People may think that we're strange, but are we willing to demonstrate that love by bringing to him whatever it is that we have in our hand to bring him, whether that's in song, whether that's again in some action or some service for him. What are we prepared to demonstrate our love for Jesus? So don't necessarily trust what your skills and your talents are, even though they're things that God's put in your hand. Trust that God will use them. Don't look at the size of the problem. Look at what God can do with what you give to him. Don't look for recognition. Just trust that God sees and will use it. And lastly, what are you doing to demonstrate your love? What have you got that you can demonstrate to him how much you love him? Last slide. I have some prayer points here for the mission. So for wisdom and direction in moving forward following the pandemic. I feel that it's not a time to, back to normal, reset to, factory reset, let's just go back to what we were doing. I really feel the need to listen to God's direction and to know where and what is leading us into. So I'd appreciate your prayers on that. Pray for the increased numbers of children that are coming, that they will hear the word, that the Holy Spirit will do that work in them, that they will respond and that will come to Christ. I'm excited because we've got at least one team coming this summer and maybe 2 or 3 more who are interested in coming. So please pray that teams will be able to come back and visit. The travel's a lot easier, but we are very close to Ukraine, and I think some people are a bit worried about that. At the moment, it's fairly safe, I think. So pray that it stays that way, and that we will have teams who will be able to come and support us in the work there. My long-term colleagues and friends are going back to America a week on Wednesday. I shall be so sorry that they're going back permanently. Paul has some health issues and he needs to be back in the States to get the care and the therapy and the treatment that he needs. So they're leaving. It will leave a big hole, and just pray how God's going to fill that and use that situation. And just to give thanks to God for his amazing provision throughout this difficult time of the pandemic. So many people were suffering hard times, difficult times, and yet they still contributed to our work. And I just thank God that that was the case.